If someone had told me that after nearly 3 decades of unwavering dedication to a company, I'd be shown the door just weeks after finishing my final round of chemotherapy, I would have laughed a tired, disbelieving laugh of someone who once thought loyalty always meant something. But I was wrong, and the betrayal that broke me didn't come only from the company. It came from where I least expected it, my own family. My name is Martin Hale, 58 years old. I was the head of client relations at Cresmont Riley, a mid-sized but well-known marketing firm in Chicago. I had given that job everything: early mornings, late nights, skipped vacations, sacrificed birthdays, all in the name of excellence. I never once complained. I was dependable, loyal, and always the first one in and the last one out. That is, until the day my doctor placed a gentle hand on my shoulder and told me they found a mass on my pancreas. Cancer. The word landed like a slow, heavy punch to the gut. The following 6 months were a blur of hospital rooms, chemotherapy sessions, and the slow erosion of my strength. I lost my hair, lost weight, and on some days I nearly lost hope. But even then, I clung to the belief that when it was all over, I'd still have a place at the company I helped build. They told me to focus on recovery, that they'd hold my spot, that I was valued. But words are cheap. Just 2 weeks after finishing my final treatment, I received a call from HR. The voice on the other end was clinical, cold, and detached. They said my role had been restructured. My position was no longer necessary. I sat in silence, not even surprised. Not really. I knew what they saw now when they looked at me. A worn-out man in his late 50s with a medical history, a liability. My years of experience, the clients I'd secured and nurtured, the crises I'd averted, none of it mattered anymore. I had become invisible, disposable. I went home that day not just exhausted, but hollow. My wife passed away 3 years ago, and our daughter now lives across the country with her own growing family. The only close relatives I still saw regularly were my younger brother Greg and his wife Melanie, who lived just a few blocks away. They often invited me over for dinner, always with warm smiles and polite small talk. But lately, something in Melanie's tone had started to shift, especially when I spoke about trying to get back into the workforce. There was a tightness in her expression, a flicker of something. Unease? Maybe even irritation? Still, I brushed it off. That is, until one evening, over Greg's famous grilled ribs, I shared a bit of good news that I hadn't told anyone yet. I had an interview coming up at Harrison Moss, a top-tier marketing agency even bigger than my old firm. I didn't expect a parade, just maybe a nod of encouragement, some quiet support, and Greg gave me Thaith's hand on my shoulder, a proud grin. But Melanie? She offered a thin smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, then quickly steered the conversation elsewhere. That moment stayed with me. I couldn't explain why, but it felt wrong. Like there was something unsaid hanging in the air, something I wasn't meant to see. And I had no idea that behind her silence, a betrayal was quietly taking shape, and not by some faceless rival, but by someone who once called me family. The morning of the interview began with that deceptive kind of stillness when the sky is cloudless, the air crisp, and yet something beneath the surface feels just slightly out of place. I woke early, not from the alarm, but from the weight of anticipation. After months of dragging my body through chemotherapy, staring down my own mortality, and slowly piecing my strength back together, today was the day I would step back into the world and try to reclaim something I thought I had lost forever. My place. I dressed carefully, each button fastened with intention, each breath steadying the nerves that fluttered quietly beneath my resolve. The drive downtown was filled with silence and self-talk, the kind of pep talks you whisper when no one else is listening, because the person you're trying to convince isn't the world, it's yourself. Harrison Moss towered above me, all glass and steel, a reflection of everything I used to be sharp, polished, steady. As I stood in the lobby, my folder in hand and my heart cautiously open, I had no idea that my past was already waiting for me in the form of a manila envelope, clenched in the hands of a receptionist whose forced smile betrayed something colder underneath. "Mr. Hale," she said, her voice clipped, polite, distant. "There are some concerns we need to address before the interview can proceed." Before I could form a question, she handed me the folder and nodded for me to sit. Inside were copies of emails, claims of a criminal record I didn't have, and allegations of substance abuse that had never touched my life. My breath faltered. My hands went cold. I tried to explain there must be some mistake, but her face didn't change. The room, once bright with possibility, suddenly felt airless. "We take these matters seriously," she said, standing, as if my denial was nothing more than a tired excuse. I walked out of the building in a haze of disbelief, barely aware of where my feet were taking me. My mind reeled with questions. Who would do this? Why? What kind of person fabricates something so cruel? It wasn't until I was alone in my car, gripping the steering wheel as if it could anchor me, that I called Nick. If anyone could help me think clearly, it was her. She listened as I poured it all out, every humiliating detail, and when I finished, she was quiet for a moment before saying, "This wasn't random, Martin. Someone wanted you out of the picture." That night, I sat across from her kitchen table with a bottle of wine and a sense of disbelief so deep it bordered on numbness. We opened my laptop and began digging. It didn't take long before the evidence began to surface. My email had been hacked, dozens of unauthorized logins, forged messages, and then something worse. A fake Facebook profile under my name, filled with photoshopped images of wild parties, suggestive captions, and posts meant to paint me as unstable and unreliable. It was as if someone had constructed an entirely new life for Mione, designed to sabotage everything I had worked to rebuild. Nick stared at the screen, her brow furrowed. Who would go this far just to destroy you? I didn't want to believe the answer, but deep down, something had already begun to click into place. Melanie, her tight-lipped smile at dinner, the shift in her eyes when I'd announced the interview, the way she had quickly changed the subject and looked away. The next day, I reached out to Jacob cousin, a cybersecurity expert who had helped me once before when a scammer targeted my late wife's email. I gave him everything. 3 days later, he called me to his apartment and showed me a digital trail so precise, so undeniable, that it made my stomach turn. The fake emails, the doctored photos, the anonymous phone calls to Harrison, or morsel of it, led back to Melanie's personal devices. I sat in silence, staring at the screen, struggling to reconcile the woman I once called family with the person who had gone to such dark lengths to ruin me. And then I remembered the hushed arguments I'd overheard between her and Greg, the worried glances, the strained finances they never talked about. It wasn't just malice, it was desperation. That didn't excuse it, but it explained the depth of the betrayal. She hadn't sabotaged me because I had wronged her. She had done it because I reminded her of everything she thought she was, losing dignity, relevance, control. I didn't cry, I didn't rage. I just sat there, letting it sink in that someone I had trusted, someone I had consoled at her mother's funeral, who I had bought groceries for during the pandemic, had tried to erase the last bit of my self-worth. And as painful as it was, I also knew one thing for certain. I was not going to let her succeed. The drive to Greg and Melanie's house that evening felt longer than usual, not because of traffic or distance, but because of the storm building in my chest and aching weight that pressed harder with every turn of the wheel. I didn't arrive with vengeance in my heart, nor with a prepared speech. Instead, I brought with me the truth, the evidence, and the bitter realization that the people I once leaned on were capable of cutting me deeper than any stranger ever could. As I parked at the curb, I took a deep breath, not to calm myself, but to remind myself that I wasn't here to burn bridges. I was here to name the fire that had already scorched them. When Melanie opened the door, her surprise was immediate, and behind her, Greg stood up from the living room recliner, a confused look on his face, as if sensing something wasn't right. I didn't wait for small talk or the obligatory offer of coffee. Instead, I stepped inside and placed the flash drive Jacob had given me, containing every digital fingerprint of her betrayal, onto the coffee table between us. I sat down slowly, steadying my voice. "Melanie, I know what you did," I said, not with anger, but with the heavy calm of someone who had replayed this moment in his head 100 times. She didn't respond at first, just stared at the drive like it might explode. Greg looked between us, clearly lost. "I think it's time you told him," I added, never breaking eye contact with her. Her lips parted, then shut again, and for a moment, the only sound was the low hum of their refrigerator from the kitchen. Finally, her composure cracked. Tears welled in her eyes as she reached for the truth, though even now she tried to soften it. She spoke haltingly, admitting she accessed my accounts, created the fake social media page, and sent the anonymous tips. She said it started with panic, with the fear of losing their home, of drowning in Greg's gambling debts, of falling apart while I seemed to be rising again. After illness had nearly ended me, Greg's face turned to stone, his body rigid as the weight of her confession settled on his shoulders. He asked questions not loudly, not angrily, but with the flat voice of a man suddenly seeing his life through a shattered lens. "You tried to destroy him? To protect me?" he whispered, and she nodded, sobbing now, her shoulders shaking. I listened, not because I was ready to forgive, but because I needed to hear the full scope of what she had done, to understand the depth of the wound so I could truly decide what came next. And when her voice finally fell silent, I stood up, feeling older and heavier than I had in years. "You didn't just sabotage a job," I said softly. "You tried to erase everything I had left after the cancer, after the layoff, after losing my wife. And you didn't even look me in the eye when you did it." Greg tried to speak, but I raised a hand. "This isn't about revenge. It's about accountability. You both need help, but I won't be part of this anymore." The walk back to my car was quiet. No one followed me out. No one called after me. And I didn't look back. Some moments don't require drama, they only need truth, finally spoken aloud. In the following days, I gathered myself not with rage, but with resolve. I compiled every document, every message, and wrote to Harrison Moss not to beg, but to clarify, to speak honestly, and to offer proof of my integrity. I didn't know if it would make a difference, but I needed to take that step for myself. A week later, the phone rang. It was the HR director from Harrison Moss. Her voice, this time, was different, softer, more human. She told me they had reviewed everything and admired how I had handled the situation with such dignity. She invited me back for a new interview. The second time I walked into that lobby, I wasn't nervous, I was grounded. The receptionist remembered me. She smiled. This time was something real behind it. I didn't wear the same blazer. I didn't carry the same fear, but I brought the same belief that no matter how hard the world tries to push you down, there's strength in standing up again, even if you're doing it alone. A few weeks later, I joined their team not at an executive level, not with fanfare, but with purpose. I worked hard, not to prove myself to them, but to remind myself that I still had value, that age and scars and setbacks weren't signs of weakness, they were marks of survival. And slowly, life began to take shape again, not as it once was, but as it was meant to be now. I showed up, I delivered, and I smiled again, not because everything had been fixed, but because I had decided to move forward anyway. Comeback doesn't always mean triumph in headlines or applause. Sometimes it's just about reclaiming what was yours all along, your dignity, your voice, your peace. And for the first time in a long time, I felt all three return to me. Healing is rarely linear. It moves like a tide, sometimes calm, sometimes crashing, and in the months that followed, I learned to ride its rhythm without expecting to ever fully tame it. Harrison Moss became more than just a workplace. It became a space where I was no longer defined by my past, where my worth wasn't diminished by age or illness, and where I could rediscover the quiet power of being needed. I mentored fresh college graduates who reminded me of the passion I once had. I spearheaded a few modest campaigns, and most importantly, I began to sleep through the night without waking from dreams of hospital rooms or boardroom betrayals. Life, while far from perfect, settled into something sturdy and honest. I took up walking each morning, nothing dramatic, just enough to breathe and feel the crisp Chicago air against my skin. I cooked more, read more, even picked up an old hobby of woodworking that I had abandoned when career and responsibility swallowed my time. I wasn't rebuilding the same life. I was crafting a new one with hands that had trembled but never quit. Greg and Melanie remained a distant presence. I heard through mutual friends that counseling had become a regular part of their lives. There was no grand reconciliation, no dramatic apology, just the quiet acknowledgement that we all had to live with our choices. When Greg texted again around the holidays a simple, polite message, I read it, smiled faintly, and then let it go unanswered. Some doors, once closed, are better left that way, not out of bitterness, but because peace is often found in the boundary, not the reunion. What this journey taught me, perhaps more than anything else, is that dignity is not about never falling. It's about how you rise and who you become in the process. I learned that trust, once broken, can take years to rebuild, if it ever does. But I also discovered something deeper. that I no longer needed validation from the very people who tried to erase me. I had reclaimed my story, not with revenge, but with resolve, not with anger, but with action. I often think about the man I used to be before the diagnosis, before the betrayal of the man who believed loyalty guaranteed safety, that family meant unconditional support, and that hard work always paid off. That man was not naive, he was hopeful. But hope, when tempered by hardship, becomes something sturdier. It becomes strength. If you've ever been broken by illness, by age, by betrayal, know this: you are not finished. You are not forgotten. The world may try to replace you, silence you, even bury your name beneath lies, but your value is not theirs to decide. You define it every time you choose to get up, to speak truth, to walk forward. And if you've made it this far in my story, maybe it's because some part of you needed to hear this. Maybe you've been there or you're there now. If so, know that you're not alone. Your comeback may not look like mine, but is waiting for you all the same. If this story touched you or reminded you of something you've survived, I invite you to share it. Leave a comment. Subscribe. Let's make sure these stories aren't just heard, they're remembered. Because sometimes the quietest voices carry the most powerful truths. Thank you for listening.